Right now, you are doing something. You are watching, listening, scrolling, reading. Your brain is occupied. And somewhere in the back of your mind, there is a quiet, constant fear of the moment when it stops. That fear has a name. You call it boredom. But what it actually is, what it is doing to your body, your choices, and your survival, is far stranger than you have ever been told. Boredom is not a modern invention. It is not a side effect of smartphones or Netflix or a culture addicted to stimulation. Boredom is ancient. It is wired into the oldest parts of your nervous system. And researchers are now beginning to suspect that your relationship with boredom is one of the most important forces shaping your life, whether you realize it or not. Here is what the science actually says. In 2014, a team at the University of Virginia, led by psychologist Timothy Wilson, ran a series of now famous experiments. Participants were placed in a bare room, alone, with nothing to do, for between 6 and 15 minutes. They were told one thing. They could press a button that would deliver a mild electric shock to themselves if they wanted to. A shock most of them had already rated as unpleasant. A shock they said they would pay money to avoid. 2/3 of the men in the study shocked themselves anyway. 1/4 of the women did too. Rather than simply sit with their own thoughts, they chose pain. Think about that for a moment. Your brain would rather hurt itself than do nothing. That is not a quirk. That is a signal. And understanding what that signal is trying to tell you changes everything. Your nervous system evolved in an environment where stillness meant danger. For the vast majority of human history, the 300,000 years before cities, before agriculture, before the idea of leisure even existed, your ancestors lived in a world where predators were real and unpredictable, where food was scarce and could disappear without warning, where a quiet moment was not a gift, it was a warning. Anthropologist Daniel Lieberman at Harvard has spent decades studying the mismatch between ancient bodies and modern environments. His research shows that the human brain did not evolve to rest. It evolved to scan, to monitor, to prepare. Stillness in the ancestral world was often the last moment before something went very wrong. And your brain still carries that blueprint. When you sit down and do nothing, your amygdala, the threat detection center of your brain, does not take a break. It starts searching. It has no lion to track, no horizon to scan. So it turns inward, and it starts generating threats instead. Intrusive thoughts, anxiety, a creeping sense that something is wrong, even when nothing is. That is boredom, not emptiness, a misfiring alarm. And here is the counterintuitive part. The more you run from it, the louder it gets. Psychologist Sandy Mann at the University of Central Lancashire has spent years studying boredom as a functional state, not a flaw, but a feature. Her research argues that boredom exists for a reason. It is your brain's signal that the current environment is not meeting your needs, that you are underusing your capacity, that something more meaningful is available. In one of her studies, participants who were first made to feel bored, through a deliberately tedious task, performed significantly more creatively on tasks that followed than participants who were not bored. Boredom, when you stop resisting it, becomes fuel. It produces what Mann calls a restless reaching, a search for something new. That search is where creativity lives. That search is where ambition begins. Your ancestors felt it too. That same restless reaching is what drove early humans to explore beyond the familiar valley, to experiment with new materials, to ask questions about the sky and the seasons and what lived on the other side of the mountain. Boredom is not the absence of drive. It is drive with nowhere to go. and what you do with it determines the shape of your life. But here is where the modern world has built a trap. Every time you reach for your phone, every time you flip to the next video, every time you fill the silence before it has a chance to speak, you are not escaping boredom. You are training your brain to fear it more. You are lowering the threshold. You are making the space between stimulations feel shorter, sharper, more unbearable. Neuroscientist Judson Brewer at Brown University has studied the neural patterns of craving and distraction for over 2 decades. His research shows that avoidance behaviors create feedback loops. The more you escape a sensation, the more your brain codes that sensation as a threat. And the more threatening it feels, the faster you reach for the escape. The cycle tightens. And the actual capacity to sit with your own mind, a skill that every generation before yours had no choice but to develop, quietly disappears. This is not a judgment. It is a mechanism. Your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do. It is learning from experience. It is updating its model of what is dangerous. And right now, for a growing number of people, the most dangerous thing in the world is an empty afternoon. What does that cost you? Studies on attention restoration, drawn from the work of psychologists Rachel and Stephen Kaplan at the University of Michigan, show that the brain requires periods of low stimulation to consolidate memory, regulate emotion, and restore the focused attention that complex tasks demand. When you never let yourself be bored, when every gap is immediately filled, you are not resting your brain. You are keeping it in a state of constant, low-level alertness. And over time, that state produces the same physiological markers as chronic stress. The mind needs silence the way the body needs sleep. Not because silence is pleasant, because without it, something essential stops working. There is a particular kind of thinking that only happens when you are doing nothing. Scientists call it default mode network activation. This is the neural state your brain enters when it is not focused on an external task. It is the state in which you daydream, in which you process unresolved experiences, in which you imagine futures, rehearse conversations, and weave together threads that conscious, directed thought cannot reach. The default mode network is where your sense of self lives. It is where empathy is generated. It is where you figure out who you are and what you actually want. Every time you escape into stimulation, you are interrupting that process. You are walking away from a conversation with yourself before it has the chance to say anything important. Ancient humans had no choice but to let that conversation happen. The long walks, the hours by the fire, the quiet of a world without electricity. Their inner lives were shaped by enforced stillness, and many researchers now argue that the epidemic of anxiety, identity confusion, and emotional numbness spreading through younger generations is not a coincidence. It is the symptom of a brain that has been denied the silence it was built for. So here is what you can actually do with this. The goal is not to throw away your phone or declare war on stimulation. The goal is to change your relationship with the feeling of boredom itself. To recognize it not as an emergency, but as a signal. To stay with it long enough to hear what it is actually saying. Start small. Let a line at the grocery store pass without filling it. Let a commute happen without a podcast. Sit outside for 10 minutes with no goal. Notice the discomfort. Notice that it peaks and then, if you do not run, it softens. And what is left, on the other side of that discomfort, is something your brain has been trying to give you the whole time. A thought you have not had before. A memory that needed to surface. A question you did not know you were carrying. Boredom is not the enemy of a full life. It is the door to one. The next time you feel that pull, that restless, uncomfortable urge to reach for something, anything, to fill the silence, remember where it came from. Remember that it kept your ancestors alive. Remember that it is trying to tell you something. And just for a moment, before you flip to the next thing, try staying.